So your first task for this week is to create journal entries and then report our revenue earned. So you should have two Excel files downloaded with you. And the first file that you see is a data extract file from our front desk system that you saw from the previous video. And what we're going to do with this data extract file is we're going to use Excel to turn it into useful accounting information. Now, did that last sentence that I just said sound a little bit familiar? Because by this time, if you have a good understanding of the financial management cycle, everything is really going to just start clicking. So, quick recap, what is step one of the cycle? Front desk produces the numbers. So, let's get the numbers. What you see here is a database of all the transactions that have ever occurred at the Ramada. So, remember the transaction that we saw with our best friend Donald Trump with that room charge and then that $90 Visa payment charge? Well, that was just one transaction. This database is the sum of all the transactions of all the guests based on what we filter. So the raw data file you have with you is filtered to only the month of June. All right, let's open it up. Now that we have the numbers, what is step two of the financial management cycle? Step two is turning these numbers into useful accounting information. Now, looking at this database, I totally understand if you decide to quit, because I get you, this looks terrible. It's just a bunch of data all mixed, jumbled up together. But this is actually a really good visualization of what I talked about in the previous video. Everything you see here is produced by the front desk. And as they just go about doing their day-to-day tasks, checking guests in, checking guests out, they're producing the data that you see right here. But again, right now, right, this is just numbers. What we can do is we can use Excel to change this into useful information. Now the best way to approach this mess, in my opinion, is to only focus on what we care about. So let's do an example together. I want to find out the revenue earned on June 20th. So right off the bat, I can choose to only care about the stuff in June 20th. Now, if you remember the previous video, the moment a room charge is posted, what happens? Revenue is earned. The moment a room charge is posted, revenue is earned. So the second thing, other than the date that I can focus on, is that the transactions that are room charges. And these transactions are indicated as RM. You should see it right here in this column. So now we have two criterias, right? We can focus on the date and we can focus on the transaction, specifically the room charge. And we can use these two criterias to tackle on this spreadsheet. So let's use a useful Excel tool called the filter, which is located right here. I'm using a Mac, so it might be a little bit different on the Windows, but it's more or less the same idea. If I click this triangle on the date column, I'm going to be able to filter the information I care about. So for now, it's because I only care about June 20th, I'm going to filter it to June 20th. We also only care about the room charges because they make up our revenue earned. So let's click the triangle in the transactions column and let's filter it to only RM, which is the room charge. So if I do a quick sum formula, and I just gotta go to this cell here and type equals sum, I have determined that my revenue earned is $2,798.57 for June 20th. Now, I don't know about you, but it would be pretty shitty to have to do this for every day of the week, sorting through the different dates and filtering it. I don't think it's gonna take that long, but it just wouldn't be the most fun. So that's why with Excel we can really automate this whole thing using the sum ifs formula. And so this is the main lesson I want to teach you for this video, is this very special formula that is awesome. And the concept behind this formula is it allows us to add cells based on certain criteria. So this formula has two components, okay? The first component asks the question, what are we adding? So because we want to know the revenue earned, because we're creating journal entries to report our revenue earned, we want to know the dollar amount because we're adding dollars. So this is going to be in column K, right? The first component is what are we adding? And we're adding everything we see in column K. But we're not going to add every single cell in this column, right? That wouldn't make sense. We only want to add the amount based on what we care about, which is the two criteria that I was talking about, the room charges and the date, June 20th. Now pay attention, because this is really the trickiest part. In order to make it clear to Excel what my restrictions are, two things need to be done. We need to tell Excel where the restriction is, and we need to tell Excel what the restriction is. So we need to tell Excel where the restriction is, and we need to tell Excel what the restriction is. So let's start with the dates. What is the restriction? The restriction is June 20th. Where is the restriction? The restriction is in column A. So now we can create the formula. So what we want to do is double click a cell and type equals SUMIFS open parentheses. Now it's important that the if is plural because we have multiple restrictions. So again, the first component is, what are we adding? Well, like we said, we're adding the dollars in column K. So I'm just going to go ahead and click column K right here and put in a comma to move on to the next section. The second component is, what are my restrictions? So going back to, again, what I said, it's looking for where that restriction is and what that restriction is. So for the date, the restriction is going to be in column A, and the restriction is that it has to be in June 20th. And then the second restriction is the transaction, right? We want it to be only room charges. So where is the restriction? The restriction is in column B. And what is the restriction? Well, the restriction is that it has to be a room charge, which is RM. Now this is where a lot of you might get it wrong. Don't forget to include quotation marks around both the date and the transaction. So I'm going to put quotation marks around the RM. Now when you do the work this week, I want you to report the revenue for a whole week, but this formula only captures June 20th. So this is what we can do to work around it. We can put the date in this cell right here and do a quick adjustment to the formula, where instead of typing the date directly into the formula, we can just designate the location of the date. So now what happens when we change the date in this cell to June 21st? Boom, look at that. Is this not badass? Tell me this isn't badass. Let's go back to what I just did, because I kind of went through that a little bit too fast. So instead of directly inputting the date, June 20th, into the formula, I replaced it with the location of the cell, which is N13. Cool, so you just learned how to use a very important Excel formula. Next week we're gonna take this to the next level when we talk about different market segments, but now I kind of just want to, make it very simple for you and move on to creating the journal entries. So when we create the journal entries, two entries have to be posted at the same time. One of them is called a debit and the other one is called a credit. Now it's okay to be confused right now, especially for those of you that don't have much accounting experience. But things are going to make a lot more sense as the weeks progress. Just know that for now, we need to have two different entries. We need a credit and we need a debit. So let's do one together. we see here on June 20th that we have earned this amount of money in revenue. So as a result, we're going to debit that amount to accounts receivable and credit that amount to revenue earned. Again, with journal entries, we always need a debit and we need a credit. And the debit and credit always have to be equal. They need to be able to balance each other out. Now in the next weeks, I'm going to go into more detail about exactly what an accounts receivable is and just how these accounts relate to each other and how they relate to financial statements. But again, just for your learning purposes, we're going to kind of just take it step by step. And of course, for those of you that have accounting experience and know what I'm talking about, this week is probably just going to be a breeze for you. Now, we also can't forget about sales tax, right? Tax is 15% of my revenue. So with tax, we're going to debit the accounts receivable account and we're going to credit the sales tax payable account. So 15% of my amount is this much. So we need to debit that amount to accounts receivable and credit that amount to sales tax payable. Now again, notice how we involve both a debit and a credit, and notice how the amounts must be the same. So as far as journal entries goes, two concepts I just want you to remember is that when we post journal entries, we need to include two accounts, a debit and a credit, and those two accounts need to balance out together. So now let's open the second Excel file where the journal entries will be reported. There's a lot going on here, but for this week, I only want you to focus on the columns that are highlighted in gray. I've already completed June 20th for you, so try your best to really just follow this format and finish the work for the rest of this week. Now, notice how for the credits, it's a negative amount. So for each each pair of journal entries, I guess I can say, they need to add up to 0, right? Because remember that the debit must always equal the credit. I also want to give you a little challenge to see if you have actually learned everything this week. Right now, these journal entries only include room charges. They only include the revenue that we have earned. But remember our Donald Trump example? Remember how we also charged $90 to his Visa card? So these journal entries haven't captured the payments that Ramada has received, right? If you go back to the waiter example, the waiter has given you the bill, right? They've told you that you owe them money, but these journal entries haven't recorded the action where you give the waiter your money. So the challenge is this. Using this SUMIFS formula that you have just learned, try creating journal entries for all of the Visa payments for our guests for the week. Break it down for each day just like we did for the room charges. So you should be debiting the cash accounts and you should be crediting the accounts receivable accounts. I'll repeat that one more time. For the challenge, the accounts that must be involved is we want to debit the cash account and we want to credit the accounts receivable account. And don't forget to include the journal entries in the second Excel file under the challenge tab. And that really just concludes your lesson for this week. If you've received an email with the attachments, well, you should have received an email with the attachments to access the work. And please note, this is very important that everything you have is 100% confidential because this is my real world, real life data. So revealing it to anyone that is not in this program will make me very unhappy. And as always, please contact me for any questions or concerns.